25-year-old makeup artist and social media influencer Stephanie Parzer vanished after a family outing in Monmouth County, New Jersey on the day before Halloween in 2019. About a month before she disappeared, she was reportedly assaulted by her on and off boyfriend, 29-year-old former stockbroker John Osbilgen. Following the incident, Parzer filed a police complaint against Osbilgen. On the night before she went missing, she received a string of angry text and Facebook messages from Osbilgen, which she did not answer. In the profanity-laden correspondence, Osbilgen accused Parzer of always making their relationship suck. While searching Osbilgen's home in connection with the young woman's disappearance, investigators found evidence of his involvement in an unrelated crime for possessing illicit images. Prosecutors tried persuading the judge overseeing the case to detain Osbilgen, but he was released from custody and found dead shortly thereafter. In a note left behind to his family, he confessed to killing Parzer, whose body was discovered in a wooded area 2 months later by 2 teenagers. Osbilgen also admitted that the prospect of serving life in prison is what forced him to resort to the grim alternative. Stephanie's father, Ed Parzer, told Fox News that he immediately suspected Osbilgen of being involved in his daughter's disappearance and death. He explained that Stephanie and Osbilgen met in person after first connecting on a dating site, but that their relationship was volatile and Stephanie wanted to end it. Ed also said that he got a bad feeling from Osbilgen, but that Stephanie had ignored his warnings and urged him to give her boyfriend a chance. And he hoped that his gut instinct would be proven wrong, but unfortunately, the opposite happened. Number 18. Beau Eugene Savage. In late June of 2022, 35-year-old Tyranny Savage filed for an order of protection against her estranged husband, 35-year-old Beau Eugene Savage, in Roscommon County, Michigan. In her petition, she wrote that she feared for both her safety and the safety of her son after discovering that Beau had recently bought a gun. Tyranny also expressed concerns about Beau's mental health and certain threats of violence he had recently made. 3 days later, a judge denied the request on the basis of insufficient evidence of immediate or irreparable injury. In his decision, the judge wrote that Tyranny had permission to request the order of protection in divorce court, but she unfortunately would never get that opportunity. Less than 2 weeks after the order of protection was denied, police were called to Tyranny's home in Houghton Lake, where they found her dead body along with the bodies of her teenage son, Dayton Cowdery, her mother, 58-year-old Kim Lynette Ebright, and Beau. They had all been killed by gunshot wounds during the early morning hours, and while authorities initially declined to identify who they believed pulled the trigger, it was later determined that Beau was responsible for massacring his family and that he acted out of anger toward Tyranny for filing for divorce. As you'll see with several other cases on today's list, there's no way of knowing whether an order of protection would have prevented Beau from harming his family, but Tyranny was clearly aware of the red flags that preceded her death, and she did everything in her power to try preventing the tragedy that befell her and her loved ones, just weeks after she tried obtaining a protective order. Number 17. Elliot Fogle. For nearly 2 decades, Claire Waxman was stalked relentlessly by her former classmate, Elliot Fogle. Despite his repeated arrests and convictions for the crime, and even after he received a lifetime ban against contacting or going anywhere near his victim, the first restraining order banning Fogle from contacting Waxman was granted in 2005, but it did little, if anything, to stop or even slow down the stalking. Over one 12-month period alone, Fogle Googled Waxman's name over 40,000 times. He also showed up at Waxman's home, workplace, and even her child's daycare, where he posed as a parent who was interested in the facility's services. The lifetime restraining order was imposed in 2006, but Fogle has violated it at least 3 times without serving major prison time. In recent years, he mailed Waxman's employer a 20-page letter filled with false incriminating claims against her. As the years wore on with no end in sight to Fogle's stalking, Waxman's mental health understandably suffered. She was eventually diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder due to the constant occurrences which had a re-triggering effect on her psyche following 47-year-old Fogle's 6th conviction in 2022. He was released from custody immediately, despite receiving a 16-month sentence due to the amount of time he had spent in pre-trial detention. Speaking with BBC Newsnight, Waxman described Fogle's sentence as an insult. The seemingly lenient outcome prompted her to call for changes in the law, which would permit harsher sentences against repeat stalkers. Because, as Waxman put it, the current system is not working for victims. Sadly, the authorities disagreed with Waxman's assessment of how her case was handled. A Home Office spokesperson told BBC that the agency takes stalking extremely seriously and pointed out several new measures that have been imposed to help deliver justice in these types of crimes, including doubling the maximum sentence for stalking from 5 to 10 years. In the meantime, Waxman remains one of Britain's most outspoken advocates against stalking. In 2017, she was appointed by London's Mayor Sadiq Khan as the city's first ever independent victims commissioner, a role she continues to fulfill to this day. Number 16. Roger Troy. In February of 2010, a 23-year-old newlywed Florida woman named Elisa Blanton was fatally gunned down outside her workplace in Coca by her longtime stalker, 61-year-old Roger Troy, who was also found dead at the scene. According to news sources, Troy had started stalking Blanton during her previous job as a Hooters waitress. About a week prior to the shooting, Blanton had presented a 70-page petition for an order of protection against Troy in court. Brevard County Circuit Court Judge Dean Moxley denied her request, claiming that he did not have enough information to make a ruling on the petition. Court records show that Moxley scheduled a subsequent court hearing to gather more information, but Blanton was murdered less than a week before the upcoming proceeding. Speaking with the Orlando Sentinel after Blanton's death, Moxley claimed he did not have enough information to determine whether Troy's activity met the legal definition of stalking. Sadly, like many other stalking victims, Blanton fell through the cracks of a system that many people with intimate knowledge of this horrific crime are all too familiar with. Following the tragedy, top forensic psychiatrist Michael Wellner appeared on Good Morning America. He explained that a true stalker does not voluntarily stop preying on their target and recommended separation as the best technique for staying safe. In other words, a victim's best bet is to physically put distance and/or barriers between themselves and the stalker. In cases where a court is unwilling or unable to lock a stalker up, this means relying on neighbors, workplace security, and others to keep their eyes and ears open for suspicious activity. But it still leaves one to wonder whether an order of protection may have acted as a deterrent against Troy, or if it would have at least served as a basis for harsher legal action against him in the future in the event of an order violation. Unfortunately, nobody will ever know because the order was not granted. Number 15. Alex Gray. Over a 7-year period, started in 2008, British singer-songwriter Lily Allen was the target of a relentless stalking campaign at the hands of a man named Alex Gray. It started with a series of tweets by Gray claiming he had written Allen's song, The Fear. He proceeded to send threatening letters to the singer's home, clothing store, record label, and her manager's office. In 2015, Gray sent Allen's mother an email stating that he planned on killing a celebrity. His behavior continued to escalate with overnight stays in Allen's backyard in London on several occasions, and he eventually broke into Allen's home where he entered her bedroom while she was asleep. Left with no other choice, Allen moved in hopes of throwing her stalker off her trail. Throughout the years she spent being harassed, spied on, and followed, she sought help from the London Metropolitan Police, who she later accused of making her feel like she was being a nuisance by reporting Gray's crimes. Allen also claimed that detectives destroyed evidence pertinent to the case and refused to let her keep a photo of Gray prior to his convictions in April 2016 of burglary and harassment. Following the court ruling, Gray was hospitalized indefinitely due to his mental issues and was banned from contacting or going near Allen. He is also banned from entering the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham or the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Even after the case was resolved, Allen remained vocal about her experience and the changes that she believes are needed when it comes to how the legal system treats stalking victims, making her an unsung hero to survivors around the world. Number 14. Michael Petch. 22-year-old beauty consultant Claire Bernal was murdered at her workplace in London by her obsessed ex-boyfriend in September of 2005. The killer, a 30-year-old Slovakian former soldier named Michael Petch, worked at the same Harvey Nichols department store as a security guard, which is where the former couple met before they began dating. The pair saw each other for just 3 weeks before Bernal ended the short-lived relationship. But instead of accepting the breakup and peacefully parting ways, Petch embarked on a ruthless campaign of terror against the young woman. For months leading up to Bernal's murder, Petch barraged her with dozens of unwanted phone calls and text messages daily. He also stared at her while she worked, followed her home after her shifts, and threatened to kill her if she went to the police. Bernal, nevertheless, sought help from law enforcement and her superiors at work, and Petch was arrested but was quickly released without bail, enabling him to continue stalking and terrorizing his ex-girlfriend. Shortly after being freed, he showed up at Bernal's doorstep and was arrested for violating his bail, but he was once again released on bail while awaiting sentencing on a harassment charge, which he pleaded not guilty to. 2 weeks later, Bernal was gunned down in cold blood at her workplace. Petch entered the store through the back door and shot her in the back of the head while high on cocaine, killing her instantly. He then shot Bernal 3 times from the front and also took a gunshot and died at the scene. In this senseless tragedy's aftermath, Bernal's loved ones said that she had told them shortly into the relationship that she felt suffocated and that things were moving too fast. According to one relative, Petch had already told Bernal that he loved her despite having only been on 3 dates together. In hindsight, all the signs of an unhealthy and unnatural obsession were there, but nobody would have imagined that Petch would take his fixation with Bernal as far as he did. Number 13. Frances Skoza, 61-year-old Audrey Peterson of Clearwater, Florida, was desperately trying to seek help from a neighbor when her ex-boyfriend, 71-year-old Francis Skoza, shot her dead in cold blood in February of 2024. Skoza had shown up at Peterson's residence at around 8 in the evening and forced his way inside, prompting her to run from the home on foot. As she attempted to flee, Skoza shot her multiple times, killing her at the scene. Police responded to multiple calls about the shooting and arrived to find both Peterson and Skoza dead from gunshot wounds. Just days earlier, Peterson had sought a protective order against Skoza, but was denied by the judge, Doneen Law. The relationship between the victim and her killer had recently ended, and Skoza was apparently unwilling to accept that it was over. Law's denial of Peterson's petition for a restraining order has prompted outcries among activists for her resignation. The most outspoken advocate for her removal from the bench was Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, who was also denied a protective order against her own stalker. Luna accused the system of failing Peterson and failing to respect her as an individual. She believes that if Peterson's request for a protective order had been granted, Peterson would still be alive. This claim was countered by reminders from other activists about how a piece of paper does not guarantee a person's safety. especially when it comes to stalkers who tend not to respect court orders to leave their victim alone. Unfortunately, it will never be known whether an order of protection would have prevented the senseless tragedy that claimed Peterson's life. Number 12. Richard Ivonitz. American serial killer Richard Ivonitz murdered at least 3 female teenagers along the U.S. East Coast between 1988 and 2002. His true number of victims may never be known. He was finally identified as a serial killer after a young woman named Cara Robinson escaped after being abducted by him in June of 2002, which enabled police to connect the kidnapping to evidence from past crimes. By the time investigators figured this out, however, Ivonitz had gone on the run. 3 days after he abducted Robinson, he called his sister from Florida and confessed to committing more crimes than he can remember. He asked his sister to meet up with him, but she contacted law enforcement instead, and police moved in to arrest him in Sarasota later that day. Unfortunately, Ivonitz was dead by the time the police got to him, and it's widely believed that he took the vast majority of his dark secrets to the grave. You may be surprised to learn that he was married for a large portion of his years-long killing spree. His former wife, Bonnie Lou Gower, has gone public with her experiences on TikTok in recent years. In her videos, she describes how she married Ivonitz in 1989 when she was just 18 years old. He was 8 years her senior, and the relationship lasted for 8 years. In hindsight, Gower has reflected upon how her marriage to Ivonitz was fraught with red flags, pointing toward her husband's sinister side. She claims that Ivonitz refused to let her attend college, wouldn't let her have friends, limited her access to money and her contact with her family, controlled her weight, and frequently asked her if she would flee the country with him if the need ever arose. Even more suspiciously, Ivonitz asked Gower about fleeing together at a time when multiple women vanished from the area where the couple was living. He also started having unexplained mood swings. Gower simply assumed that her husband was stressed out about work. At the time, he was transitioning out of the military and into civilian life, and it made sense to think that he was overwhelmed by the changes. Even after the marriage became rocky, Gower, like many others who end up in toxic relationships, stayed because she felt obligated to remain committed to her vows. Thankfully, she eventually made the wise decision to end the relationship. But it wasn't until much later that she realized her ex-husband was a murderer. Looking back, it all made sense. After garnering a widespread audience on social media through her videos, Gower is now considering writing a book about her experience being married to a serial killer. Number 11. John Bussey. Known to her friends and family by the nickname Wacky for her playful character, 32-year-old Rosanna Smith was shot dead in her Thomaston, Georgia home in late May of 2021. Her ex-boyfriend John Bussey was an immediate person of interest in the case. A few hours after the discovery of Smith's body, police spotted Bussey in Atlanta. He wrecked the car after a brief pursuit and was found dead inside the vehicle. Smith's mother, Shirley Thomas, told local station ABC 13 News that her daughter was planning to leave Bussey and was looking for her own place to live shortly before she was murdered. Thomas said that Bussey had persuaded Smith into moving in with him and that it was no secret that she disliked her daughter's boyfriend. In the weeks leading up to her death, Smith had reportedly kicked Bussey out of their shared home. Smith's older brother, Rhonda Irvin, said that there were obvious red flags that the relationship was unhealthy. He tried talking her into leaving Bussey before it was too late, but he was unfortunately unable to convince her that something terrible would happen if she didn't walk away. Number 10. John Perez. 23-year-old Shandy Blackburn was viciously stabbed to death while walking home from work in the Australian city of Mackay one night in February of 2013. She wasn't very far from her residence when the killer plunged a knife into her body more than 24 times just after midnight. then left her to die in a gutter. Local residents found her making gurgling sounds as she struggled to breathe, and she died at a nearby hospital shortly thereafter. Blackburn's ex-boyfriend, John Perez, was charged and tried for her murder. A jury acquitted him in 2017, but in August of 2020, a coroner's inquest ruled that he was in fact responsible for Blackburn's death. During the hearing, it was revealed that a pickup truck, similar to Perez's Toyota Hilux, was seen in the area right around the time of the murder. Multiple witnesses testified, including 3 people who claimed to have heard Perez stating his intentions or plans to harm Blackburn on Australia Day just 2 weeks before she was killed. One witness, Charlene Perry, testified that she knew the relationship between Perez and Blackburn had not ended amicably, and that Perez still had hate in his heart for Blackburn, but that she thought he had moved on from the bitter breakup. All things considered, Coroner David O'Connell said he had no doubt that Perez was the person who fatally attacked Blackburn. Despite this determination, Perez was not and will not be held responsible for Blackburn's death, since he has already been acquitted of the crime. Unfortunately, this case is a troubling example of how sometimes people really do get away with murder. Number 9. Michael Reese. 63-year-old mother of 6, Joyce Grayson was a nurse for 36 years before her life and career were cruelly cut short in October of 2023 when she was found dead in the basement of a halfway house in Willimantic, Connecticut. She had gone there to provide medication to 39-year-old Michael Reese, a convicted predator who was living at the facility after serving prison time for past crimes. Police discovered Grayson's body after she missed several appointments later that day, prompting a concerned colleague to contact law enforcement. They quickly tracked down Reese, but no formal charges were brought against him until 6 months later in April of 2024. He's currently facing 1 count each of murder, felony murder, and attempted first-degree assault. Reese was already convicted of multiple predatory crimes against women prior to Grayson's murder. In fact, the halfway house where he was living was specifically geared toward helping those types of criminals re-enter society. The horrific crime has sparked calls for heightened safety measures for home healthcare workers, considering the fact that Reese's criminal record served as a red flag entirely on its own. Whether any improvements are made remains to be seen amid the ongoing case. In the meantime, authorities are remaining tight-lipped about the specific details of Grayson's death, including how she was murdered. Number 8. Mark Wilkey. In 2012, a 49-year-old British woman named Maria Snow waived her right to anonymity for the sake of going public with her harrowing story of being stalked by a policeman. For a 6-month period in 2009, she was tormented with daily text messages and phone calls from an unknown source who breathed heavily into the phone and told her how attractive he thought she was. At the time, Snow was going through an acrimonious divorce. During a heated argument with her estranged husband one afternoon at their home in Bedfordshire, her son called the police. Constable Mark Wilkey responded to the residents, and he reassured and embarrassed Snow that there was nothing to be embarrassed about. After ensuring that nobody was in danger, Wilkey left the scene, and despite his laid-back demeanor, Snow felt that something was off about him. But she set her concerns aside and continued living her life, and 6 months later the police were called to her home over another disagreement between her and her soon-to-be ex-husband. Once again, Wilkey responded to the scene. This time, Snow's estranged spouse was arrested as he was being taken into custody. Snow received the first text message from her stalker telling her how gorgeous and sexy he thought she was. Thinking that the sender had contacted her by accident, she told them that they had the wrong phone number, only to receive a response stating, "No, I haven't, Maria." Alarmed by the message, Snow called the police and reported the disturbing text, which was traced to a burner phone and therefore was impossible to trace at the time. As the text messages and calls continued, Snow racked her brain in an attempt to figure out who was behind the disturbing correspondence. In the meantime, the stress of the situation took over her life and even started to adversely affect her health. When the stalking was at its very worst, she was receiving calls and text messages every hour. Snow did everything in her power to try making the stalking stop, including by having her friends call and threaten the stalker. Nothing worked, but the torment suddenly stopped one day. Then at the end of 2010, Snow was shocked to learn that Wilkey had been caught using the burner phone to harass her and multiple other women. The once decorated policeman admitted to 12 counts of misconduct in public office and was sentenced to nearly 3.5 years in prison, finally bringing Snow's nightmare to a long-awaited end. Number 7. Johnny De La Rosa. In May of 2024, a 37-year-old San Antonio man named Johnny De La Rosa shot a 21-year-old woman in what he claimed was an act of self-defense. He accused the woman of stabbing him in an unprovoked fashion, and she was initially arrested on suspicion of aggravated assault, landing her behind bars at the Bexar County Jail for 10 days before the tables were turned. Further investigation revealed that De La Rosa had been systematically stalking the woman for months, leaving her feeling both trapped and terrified. According to law enforcement, detectives received video of De La Rosa trying to run the woman over with his car prior to the stabbing, along with other evidence pointing toward him as the real perpetrator. In the footage, De La Rosa could also reportedly be seen trying to shove the victim into traffic, at which point the woman stabbed him in fear for her life. Further digging exposed a months-long trail of harassment and stalking against the woman by De La Rosa. According to court documents, De La Rosa's crimes began after he met the young woman while working at a convenience store in 2023. The woman was a regular customer, and every time she went into the store, De La Rosa allegedly made unwelcome comments and advances toward her. She became so uncomfortable that she reported De La Rosa to his manager, and he was fired. Unfortunately, this only seemed to worsen the harassment. The victim later told police that De La Rosa began showing up at her workplace and that he even attacked her in front of her co-workers. He is now facing a stalking charge, but does not appear to be in custody at this time, leaving the current status of the case unclear. Authorities declined to comment when asked by a KENS5 reporter if the aggravated assault charge against the victim will be dropped. Number 6. James Dunmore. 39-year-old Alicia Watts was last seen alive in Charlotte, North Carolina, in mid-July of 2023. 2 days later, her car was found in nearby Anson County. A boyfriend of 1 year, 51-year-old James Dunmore, was found unconscious inside the vehicle. He was revived and remained a person of interest in the case while investigators worked to locate the missing woman. More than a month later, Watts' skeletal remains were found in a wooded section of a Montgomery County cemetery. That same day, authorities arrested Dunmore on suspicion of murder. He has remained held on $1 million bond ever since and is currently awaiting trial from behind bars, even after the medical examiner who performed Watts' autopsy ruled her cause of death as undetermined. The defense argued that the lack of an identifiable cause of death meant that Dunmore should be immediately released. But the judge overseeing the case blamed the autopsy results on the highly decomposed state of Watts' remains. Despite this setback, authorities remain steadfast in their belief that Watts was murdered and that Dunmore is the killer. Watts was reportedly last seen at Dunmore's home, and prosecutors believe that there is other evidence linking Dunmore to Watts' death. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 5. Stephen Turner. 30-year-old Kristen Kime of Sheffield, England, was just a teenager when she began receiving explicit phone calls and text messages from a mystery stalker. The British teenager had no idea who the caller was, yet he often knew where she was, what she was wearing, and what she was doing when he called. Kime begged the caller to stop bothering her, but the harassment continued for years before she took matters into her own hands and downloaded software for revealing the phone numbers of blocked calls. She was shocked to learn that the perverted correspondence was coming from her own uncle, Stephen Turner, whose Facebook profile turned up as soon as she entered the phone number into the search bar. After making the disturbing discovery, Kime went to the police and Turner was arrested for his crimes. In August of 2023, he was convicted of stalking involving serious alarm and distress. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. In the meantime, Kym has devoted her time and energy to raising awareness about stalking by sharing her own experience with others. Number 4. Charles Schmidtke. In December of 2022, a Bartholomew County, Indiana judge rejected 36-year-old mother of 2 Julie Yao Schmidtke's petition for a restraining order against her estranged husband, Charles Schmidtke. Just 10 days later, both Julie and Charles were found dead from gunshot wounds inside Julie's home. The subsequent discovery that Julie was pregnant at the time of her death was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the arguably needless tragedy. In her petition for a protective order, Julie accused Charles of physically harming her on at least one occasion and repeatedly harassing her. She provided screenshots of social media posts and messages from Charles as evidence to support her claims, but it apparently wasn't enough to convince the court to grant the order. Judge John Roda denied Julie's request based on his opinion that she had failed to show that the harassment and physical abuse actually occurred. 5 days later, and just days before her murder, Julie filed for divorce from Charles. A hearing was scheduled for early 2023, but she sadly did not live long enough to attend it or regain her freedom from her abuser in any capacity. Following Julie's murder, Rhoda did not respond to a request for comment from the Republic. Julie's family was understandably upset by his decision to deny the order of protection, although it will never be known if that would have been enough to keep Julie safe. At the very least, it would have set the stage for heightened legal consequences against Charles in the event of a violation. Police believe that the deadly shooting occurred during a heated argument between the estranged couple. In the wake of the tragedy, Julie's sister Lori told local station WLKY that the relationship between her sister and Charles went sour almost immediately after they got married. Charles reportedly wasted little time after he and Julie exchanged vows before he began physically abusing her, and Julie thought it would be enough for her to obtain a protective order against him. Sadly, that's not how things went in court. Lori described Julie as scared, very scared, and said that she changed her locks and equipped her house with security cameras out of a fear for her safety. Unfortunately, her fears were not unfounded, and she paid for it with her life. Number 3. John Brandon. San Diego-based flight attendant Kathy Ann Jewell was a successful independent woman, but she longed for companionship. Without ever having married and with no children of her own, she began to crave a relationship even more. As she entered her late 30s in 1989, she fell head over heels for a doctor named John Brandon while receiving treatment at his natural wellness center. As luck would have it, however, Brandon was married. Standing by her principles, Jewell refused to get romantically involved despite her insatiable attraction to him. Her luck soon changed when Brandon contacted her and told her that he was divorcing his wife. They quickly became a couple, and it wasn't long before they moved in together. At the time, Jewell was blissfully unaware of her new boyfriend's growing pile of misconduct lawsuits and criminal charges for being a peeping Tom. But there were plenty of other signs that something was off about Brandon. Shortly into the relationship, his once charming personality did a complete 180. Brandon became convinced that Jewell was cheating on him, even though she wasn't, and his constant paranoia made it extremely difficult for her to continue working as a flight attendant. He was also a raging alcoholic, and he became even more overbearing and mean when he was intoxicated. Over time, Jewell grew increasingly sick and tired of Brandon's controlling and abusive ways. She finally ended the relationship after he accused her of cheating on him with her gay co-worker, but Brandon was unwilling to peacefully leave her alone. He fired 2 gunshots into Jewell's bedroom, where she locked herself in a closet overnight until she was finally able to safely get away. Hoping for a fresh start, Jewell moved to a new city, but Brandon kept finding ways to contact her, and he managed to convince her that they had a special connection that she would never find with anyone else. Well aware that she was going against logic, Jewell allowed Brandon back into her life, hoping he would keep his promises to change and treat her better. The couple bought a house on an isolated property in Gold Beach, Oregon, and while Jewel fell in love with the peace and quiet that it offered, it wasn't an ideal place to be when Brandon got drunk. While hitting the bottle one evening in 1999, he threatened Jewel with a gun and assaulted her for hours. Jewel escaped at her first opportunity and ran to a neighbor who called the police. By the time officers arrived, Brandon had fled the scene in Jewel's car. He remained at large for years while Jewel lived in constant fear that he would reappear and hurt her, or worse. She continued to worry even after moving and changing her name, and she also wanted Brandon to get caught so that he didn't hurt anyone else. But that's unfortunately exactly what happened in 2007 when Brandon fatally shot his girlfriend, 66-year-old Turid Bentley, during one of his drunken episodes. A friend of the couple who tried to intervene was also shot and suffered permanent blindness as a result of his injuries. It was soon revealed that Brandon had evaded the authorities for nearly a decade by living under an alias. He was also found dead at the scene, and while Jewel felt disappointed that the authorities weren't able to stop him before he killed Bentley, the tragedy came with the silver lining that he would never harm another innocent person again. Today's topic was requested by Cali Girl living in Nevada and American made. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Richard Laurman. A 33-year-old Concord, New Hampshire woman named Lindsay Smith nearly died in November of 2021 when her estranged boyfriend, 55-year-old Richard Laurman, shot her in the head outside her workplace in Salem, Massachusetts. Laurman was found dead at the scene and the victim was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. A little over a month earlier, the woman had petitioned for an order of protection against Laurman. In her request, she accused Laurman of abusing her for years. She noted with full confidence that he would resort to violence in this revengeful mindset where he has lost control. The victim also stated that Laurman had threatened her on previous occasions, that he owned guns, and that he claimed to have ties to criminal organizations. The judge, Polly L. Hall, approved a temporary restraining order but denied a permanent order a month later, just days before the attempted murder. According to court records, Hall noted that the woman had failed to prove that her case met the legal definition of abuse. Based on the evidence presented by the victim, Hall concluded that the court cannot find the defendant's conduct constitutes a credible present threat to the plaintiff's safety. Following the attempt on the woman's life, an investigation was carried out to determine whether the judge had acted improperly in response to the victim's petition. An official committee concluded that Hall had acted reasonably in her decision not to grant an order of protection, even though the woman's predictions about Laurman resorting to violence turned out to be tragically spot on. The determination that Hall had committed no wrongdoing was also made despite the fact that Laurman had been involved in previous police-related incidents that some might argue were reflective of his propensity for violence and a disregard for the law. Not everyone agreed with the committee's finding, including one advocate who argued that the victim clearly demonstrated in her petition for a restraining order that she was being abused. After recovering from her injuries, Smith campaigned for legal changes that would hopefully make it easier for domestic violence victims to obtain protection from the authorities. In 2023, the state's judicial branch upheld the ruling that Judge Hall had acted reasonably, but recommended changing the law for the sake of providing more support to survivors. If these stories of naivety weren't awful enough, then find out how dreary denial can get in our previous release of When Denial Goes Wrong, coming up right after number 1. Stay tuned. Number 1. Javier ASO. Mother of 5, Lindsay Dorm, was at home with her kids in Loveland, Colorado, in July of 2022 when her ex-boyfriend Javier ASO fatally shot her and her teenage daughter, Meadow Sinner. Sadly, Dorm had done everything in her power to try protecting herself from Acevedo's violent tendencies, but her pleas for help appear to have fallen on deaf ears. Just months earlier, In September of 2021, a Laurman County judge had granted Dawn a temporary restraining order against Acevedo and 3 of her children, but the order was vacated a week later after a court denied Dawn a permanent restraining order. In November of that year, a different court granted an order of protection against Acevedo involving 2 of Dawn's children, but Dawn was not one of them. As a condition of the order, Acevedo was ordered to relinquish any guns that he owned and was banned from possessing firearms entirely. He was also required to wear a GPS ankle monitor so that his location could be tracked at all times by law enforcement. 2 months later, Dawn reported Acevedo for violating the order, naming 2 of her children, but the local police found no probable cause for criminal activity and no arrests were made. About 6 months later, Dawn obtained an order of protection against Acevedo for herself, but the court once again denied her a permanent restraining order, even after she presented evidence to support her claims of abuse, including threatening correspondence from her ex. Her response to the denial was that it was only a matter of time before Acevedo killed her, and sadly, those words turned out to be true. Roughly a month after the second order of protection denial, someone called police with concerns that Acevedo was going to kill Dawn, but just like the last suspected order violation, no probable cause for arrest was found. Dawn and Sinner were murdered 2 days later. In addition to the apparent systemic shortcomings resulting in the repeated denials of orders of protection for Dawn, Acevedo wasn't supposed to have a gun at the time of the double murder. To Dawn's family, the tragedy seemed completely preventable, especially considering the fact that Acevedo was on intensive probation at the time of the crime. The judge claimed that they had an obligation to rule in the defendant's favor in cases where they couldn't determine who was telling the truth, which was their reasoning for denying Dawn an order of protection. According to the most recent available updates on the case, Acevedo is awaiting trial on murder charges. In the meantime, the seemingly avoidable tragedy has sparked intense discussions and debates on how to better protect domestic violence victims in Colorado, where survivors are largely tasked with self-advocacy if they expect any legal action to be taken in their favor. And as Dawn's death proves, sometimes even self-advocacy isn't enough. Number 9. Kurt Carpenter. In 2021, an Alabama woman vowed to educate others on the dangers of the coronavirus after her 28-year-old son, a COVID denier, had caught the disease and succumbed to it. Kurt Carpenter, who reportedly had had no prior health issues, had been hospitalized with the virus since March. His mother, Christy, and his sister had contracted it as well but recovered. Christy revealed that she and her family had initially been hesitant about getting vaccinated because of her son's suspicions that COVID was a fabrication and that the vaccine would jeopardize their health. Kurt died in May, and according to Christy, his harrowing last words had been, "This is not a hoax, this is real." At the time, just over 30% of Alabamans had been vaccinated, and Christy was determined to use her son's story as a cautionary encouragement for others to take the disease seriously and get the potentially life-saving injections. Number 8. Lucy Richards. In 2016, a Florida woman who denied the existence of one of the most horrific massacres in U.S. history was arrested for making death threats to a family afflicted by it. 57-year-old Lucy Richards believed that the 2012 Sandy Hook mass shooting, which left 26 dead in Newtown, Connecticut, was a hoax. There'd been a long-standing conspiracy theory that it had been staged in order to pass gun control legislation. Some of the theory's most prominent supporters included radio personality Alex Jones and former tenured Florida Atlantic University professor James Tracy, who was terminated from his position at the Learning Institution after publicly expressing his denial. Jones has since recanted his claims that the massacre was a false flag and blamed a form of psychosis for his previous statements. He is, as of March 2022, in an ongoing defamation suit with 6 of the victims' families. A week before the tragedy's 4-year anniversary, Richard sent death threats to the unnamed parent of one of the victims, who was living in South Florida at the time. Justice Department spokeswoman Sarah Schall didn't comment on how the threats were delivered, but the indictment noted they'd been sent on the same day and included messages that read, "You gonna die. Death is coming to you real soon, and look behind you, it's death." In early December, Richards was charged with 4 felony counts of transmitting threats, each of which carried a maximum term of 5 years in prison. Number 7. Kelly Erby, a deputy district attorney from California who regularly spoke out against vaccine mandates, died in early January of 2022 after contracting COVID-19. True to form, Orange County prosecutor Kelly Erby hadn't gotten vaccinated, which, as argued by multiple medical experts, led to her developing more severe health complications. Erby, who'd recently run for the state assembly, had spoken at an anti-mandates rally outside Irving City Hall roughly a month prior to her death. She was quoted as telling those at the protest, organized by the conservative youth group Turning Point USA, "There's nothing that matters more than our freedoms right now." Her position against vaccine mandates predated the pandemic. In 2019, she spoke publicly against a new California law tightening immunization rules for California school children. There were rumors in the aftermath of Erby's death that she had in fact been vaccinated, but her husband took to social media urging others to stop spreading false information and confirming that his late wife had not received the vaccine, adding that was the problem. Reactions to the prosecutor's passing were characterized by an exacerbation of the existing polarization on the topic of mandates. Some suggested that 46-year-old Erby bore sole responsibility for her demise by repeatedly denying the efficiency of the vaccine. Number 6. Frederick Sinistra, a kickboxing champion from Belgium, succumbed to COVID-19 in late 2021 after checking out of a hospital and opting to treat the little virus with oxygen at home. 41-year-old Frederick Sinistra was forced to seek medical help by his coach after developing symptoms and was admitted to a medical facility in late November. His coach, Osman Yajin, had threatened that he wouldn't train him in the future if he didn't get treatment. The 3-time world champion, who is known as The Undertaker, posted a photo to social media of himself lying on a bed in the intensive care unit with an oxygen tube in his nose. From his hospital bed, the heavyweight combatant dismissed the virus and rallied against his government's efforts to contain it through mandatory vaccines. Convinced that his youth and physical fitness would protect him from the virus, Sinistra eventually discharged himself. On December the 13th, he responded to comments on his Facebook page and told his followers that he'd come back much stronger than before. 3 days later, his death was announced on the social media platform. Many expressed their condolences online, including Sinistra's former coach, who described him as a force of nature with a heart of gold, while also remarking upon the fact that his death could have been avoided. Number 5. Mac Paraha, a Canadian COVID denier who'd broken lockdown restrictions to attend a Flat Earth convention, passed away from complications associated with the virus just days after posting a video in which he reaffirmed his belief that the disease was a fabrication. Mark Paraha had gained a small following online through his support of various conspiracy theories. At the time of his death in the fall of 2021, he was on trial for 3 charges of breaking Canada's quarantine laws as he returned from a Flat Earth conference in the US the previous year. During a Twitch stream filmed 12 days before his passing, Paraha complained that he was hot and had a severely sore throat, in addition to aches and phlegm. He maintained, however, that it wasn't COVID and mocked people who suggested so, emphasizing that he couldn't be suffering from health complications associated with the virus because it didn't exist. Less than 2 weeks later, paramedics were called to his home in Sapperton, New Westminster, where they pronounced him dead. Number 4. Urula Hbec. German woman Urula Hbec, aged 88, was sentenced to 6 months in jail in 2017 after openly stating once more that the Holocaust had never happened. As per German law, those who publicly deny its existence face up to 5 years in jail, as it's regarded as incitement of racial hatred. The January 2017 incident marked the 5th time that Hbec had been convicted on similar grounds, but by then, she hadn't faced any jail time as all her cases were under appeal. In her latest controversial statements, the elderly woman, dubbed Nazi Grandma by some media outlets, maintained that there were no gas chambers at the Auschwitz death camp and disputed that over 1 million people had been killed there. In the past, Hbec had referred to it as nothing more than a labor camp. during a televised interview. The woman, a reported friend of Gudrun Berwitz, elderly daughter of Nazi SS chief Heinrich Himmler, was once chairwoman of a far-right training center that was shut down in the late 2000s for spreading extremist propaganda. In 2020, Hbec was sentenced to a year in prison after publishing an interview online in which she once again made claims that there was no historical context for the Holocaust. Updates on the matter from March of 2022 indicated that her appeal had been denied and that the 93-year-old was sent to jail with no further possible legal modifications to her sentence. Number 3. Kristen Lowry. Kristen Lowry, a mother of 4 from Escalon, California, was passionately against the COVID-19 vaccine and manifested her opinions through social media posts and by taking part in protests. In one of her online photos, the woman was seen holding a placard that read, "Give a voice to the vaccine injured," while also wearing a t-shirt through which she identified as an ex-vaxxer, vowing never to trust those who abide by them. 40-year-old Lowry posted on one of her social media profiles that she was unmasked, unmuzzled, unvaccinated, and unafraid. It was on that same profile that, in September of 2021, her family announced that the woman was in the hospital battling pneumonia and the deadly virus. While she was receiving treatment for the disease, her sister Cassie wrote messages of support, which stated that Lowry had a long life ahead of her. Unfortunately, on September the 15th, her family posted on Facebook that the woman had passed away, after which the settings of her profile were changed to private. As news of her death spread, a number of commenters paid their respects while others expressed thoughts in the vein of a lack of empathy towards people who refuse to wear masks or get vaccinated. Number 2. Hans Christian Garder. In April of 2021, shortly after hosting 2 illegal gatherings at his home, a Norwegian COVID denier and conspiracy theorist passed away due to complications related to the virus. In spite of regulations that limited social gatherings, 60-year-old Hans Christian Garder had hosted 2 events at a barn on his property in the municipality of Gran, about 40 miles from Oslo. They had taken place on March the 26th and the 27th, with the former event advertised as Trump, Biden, and the way forward for the USA and the world. Garder was a prominent conspiracy theorist who edited an online magazine and had appeared on television to voice his arguably controversial opinions. In 2009, he'd reported a national health institution and the NRK media organization to the police, accusing them of extreme fear propaganda regarding the swine flu. In recent years, Garder had shared anti-vaxxer views and wrote about the Illuminati. Throughout the pandemic, he'd compared the virus to a cold and made posts that were flagged by Facebook as false information. He died on April the 6th after a short battle with the virus and was confirmed to have been positive post-mortem. As reported by local newspaper Hadeland, at least 12 people had tested positive for the virus after attending Garder's gatherings, but the severity of their condition wasn't elaborated upon. Number 1. Luigi Costello. Italian man Luigi Costello passed away from complications associated with COVID-19 in January of 2022 at a hospital in Latina, south of Rome. Both 28-year-old Costello and his father, aged 55, had denied the virus's existence and was strongly against the vaccine. Costello maintained his ardent stance even after he was admitted to a hospital with breathing difficulties. Doctors had immediately recognized the severity of his condition and diagnosed him with acute respiratory failure. While receiving treatment, Costello reportedly tore off his oxygen mask, insisting that he didn't have the virus. By the time that staff at Latina's local health unit convinced him to cooperate, his condition had deteriorated beyond recovery. He succumbed to the complications associated with the disease on his 5th day in the hospital. His father was also hospitalized and placed on a ventilator, according to the Italian news agency ANSA, but no further updates were made available regarding his condition. Thanks for watching. Should your partner be allowed access to your phone at all times and vice versa? Let us know in the comments section below.